If you're here for fairy tales about noble knights, put this story down, because I'm not the kind who fights for the king's honor. I'm the kind who smashes the skull of the man holding the keys to the treasury. My name is Folville. My brothers and I had 7 swords, 100 enemies, and not a shred of fear. We took from the rich, shared with our own, and laughed in the faces of those who dared call us criminals. And you know why? Because in a world where the law is sold for silver, true justice smells like blood and gold. So pour yourself a mug of ale, bolt the door, and listen close. Because I'm about to tell you how the Folville brothers turned England into our personal playground. And it all started the day I realized the law was just a fancy word for fools. Subscribe if you enjoy the darker pages of history told by the ones who live them. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. We'd love to know from which corners of the world this whisper reaches you. They say birth decides your fate. Rubbish. I was born under a roof, hung with our family crest, and the smell of silver candlesticks melting in warm wax. But I grew up among people who saw the sword not as a symbol of honor, but as a tool for survival. I'm the son of old Richard Folville, landholder in Leicestershire. Our coat of arms bore a black raven on a golden field. The books say it stood for wisdom and bravery. In our family, we said something else. The raven's a scavenger, and it always gets its share. Father taught us 3 things: protect your honor, protect your sword, and protect your brothers. Honestly, we reworked the first rule over time. Honor's convenient, especially when it's covering the blade of your dagger. There were 7 of us brothers. I wasn't the eldest, but I was the loudest. Hugh, quiet, but could knock a man off his horse with one blow. Richard, hot-tempered, ready to leap into a fight at a moment's notice. Thomas, the cunning one, counting other people's coins before we'd even taken them. Childhood ended the day a royal official came to our lands. He had an order to review our taxes. What he really wanted was a slice for himself. I remember him dismounting, glancing around and saying to my father, "Fine estate you've got here, Lord Folville. Shame if anything happened to it." That evening, Father sat long with us by the fire. He spoke of corrupt courts, of how the king handed lands to his favorites and left us with scraps. And then he said the words I'd remember for life. The real law is in your hand, and if you don't hold it tight, they'll take it from you. A year later, Father was gone. Officially, dead of a fever. Unofficially, poisoned. We had no proof, but we were certain who had done it, and we brothers swore that never again would we wait for mercy from those wearing the crown. The first taste of true freedom came when Thomas, Richard, and I intercepted the tax collector's cart. It was a cold, foggy morning. I could hear the jingle of coins in the chests. When the cart wheels sank into the mud, we emerged from the forest like the black ravens on our crest. "Fine day for collecting taxes, sir," I said, crossbow aimed. "But today, we're doing the collecting." We didn't just take the money. We left the cart, so anyone passing would see. The Folvilles were back. That day, I knew my place wasn't in a courtroom. It was where the law is forged from iron. And if you want to know how a family of minor lords became England's most feared gang, stick around. Because Our next move made us enemies of the king. In 14th century England, the law could be bought for a silver penny. Royal courts, coroners, sheriffs, those robed men who preached justice, all had a price tag, just like a stall at the market. Whoever paid more got the truth on their side. I saw it with my own eyes. Once, at the market in Leicester, a tax collector stopped an old farmer. The man owed the crown 3 pennies, but he had only 1 left in his pocket. The collector took that one, and for the rest of the debt, he ripped the boots right off the old man's feet. Boots! In bloody November. The old man limped barefoot over the cobblestones while the bastard laughed and chewed roasted meat. That's when I realized, if there's any law in this country, it's the speed of your sword and the strength of your grip. Our decision to move from petty purse-cutting to real business came after the affair with Gilbert de Grange. He was a royal official who acted like he owned every acre for miles around. His men would burst into homes, seize the harvest, supposedly for the crown, and make the owners thank them for it. "He thinks he can do anything," Thomas said, spreading a rough map of the Shire on the table. "But he's got one weakness: greed." We waited. We knew Gilbert would personally carry the tax chest to Leicester. We knew he'd take the shortest route, through the pass between 2 hills where the road narrows so much that 2 wagons can't pass. I remember the smell of that morning: cold earth, fog crawling through the valley like smoke after a fire. We hid behind the crumbling stone wall, probably built in my grandfather's time. When the cartwheels clattered over the gravel, I looked at Richard. He nodded. We stepped out, and the pale morning light struck the gleam of my steel. "Master Gilbert," I began, "the king sends his thanks for your service." "What thanks?" he stammered. "This kind," I said, and drove a crossbow bolt into the nearest guard. What followed was a blur of steel, screams, and hooves. Richard cut down 2 with his sword. Hugh grabbed Gilbert by the collar like a kitten and threw him to the ground. Thomas checked the chest. Full. I even gave Gilbert a choice: keep his life or the coins. He chose life. We took the coins. That attack was our kind of baptism. We were no longer minor gentry whining about our lot. We were a force that could shape its own justice. From that day, the raven on our crest took on a new meaning. The raven no longer waited for carrion. It tore the flesh from the living. But the king doesn't tolerate men who play by their own rules. Soon enough, we learned that the hunt was on. But before that, we had one job to do, one England would remember for centuries. When I say the Folville brothers, most people picture a pack of wild dogs. And yes, we were a pack. But each of us had our own style, our own role, and our own reason for taking up the sword. Hugh, the eldest, a stone wall in human form. If he was silent, it meant either he felt nothing or someone was about to die. His hands were like iron clamps, and I once saw him stop a galloping horse by grabbing its bridle mid-run. Hugh always went in first, because nothing could move him. Richard, fire made flesh. Hot-tempered, unpredictable, his sword was always faster than his thoughts. That was both his gift and his curse. He could clear a path in a single strike, but just as easily drag us into trouble. Thomas, the brains of the gang. His weapon wasn't just a dagger, but his tongue. He could bargain with the devil and walk away with the devil's horn. If anyone knew where the gold was and how to take it so it looked like it had vanished by itself, it was Thomas, Robert, the quiet archer. He wasted no words, but his arrows always found their mark, even if it hid behind two walls and a prayer. Walter, the joker and the liar. He could convince a guard he was standing there under royal orders and get thanked for it. We used to joke that Walter could steal the bells from a church and the priest would help him carry them. Lawrence, the youngest and the wildest. He loved risk, laughed in the face of danger, and would leap onto a gold-laden cart in the middle of a crowded market without hesitation. And me, Ain, the middle brother, the one who kept the balance between all these tempers. They called me the gang's tongue and sword. The tongue, because I could talk or insult someone into doing exactly what I wanted. The sword, because when the words ran out, I never hesitated. We decided it was time for something big, not robbing a cart or a merchant, something the whole shire would talk about. The target was the castle of Minor Lord Humphrey de Langton. He was the usual sort of small-time noble, pompous, greedy, and smug enough to think he was the king's favorite. His treasury was stuffed with gold from taxes and bribes. The plan was simple. Walter enters disguised as a royal courier with an urgent letter. Thomas and I slip in behind him when the gate opens. Hugh, Richard, and Lawrence take the inner courtyard. Robert sets up on a hill for cover. Perfect, at least on parchment. When Walter walked in playing the part of the king's messenger, the guards not only opened the gate, but escorted him straight to the great hall. That was when Thomas and I slid in unnoticed. "My Lord Langton," Walter said loudly, "the king sends his thanks." "Thanks?" The lord raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Walter paused. "Thanks that you're still alive." From there, it happened fast. Hugh stormed into the hall, Richard knocked down two guards, Thomas tossed the sack we started filling with gold and silver, and Lawrence was already dragging a carpet off the floor, laughing like a madman. 15 minutes later, we were on horseback, and half an hour after that, we were deep in the forest, counting the take. From that day, people spoke of us as a pack capable of anything, but the louder you laugh, the clearer you hear the footsteps of those coming for your head. And our next job wasn't just going to be a robbery. It was going to be a challenge to the king's justice itself. There's theft, and then there's a challenge. We weren't just thieves. We liked to be remembered, and we wanted every official, before closing his eyes at night, to ask himself, "Will the Folvilles come for me tonight?" So when word reached us that Judge William de Sherwood was passing through our lands, we decided it was time to show that even the men who pass sentences aren't safe from a sentence of their own. William de Sherwood wasn't just any judge. He was a royal favorite, the same man who signed the orders to confiscate lands in our Leicestershire. Every one of his verdicts meant another farmer without a field, another lord stripped of his title. "If we take him," Thomas said, leaning over the table and spreading out a map of the roads, "it won't just be a blow, it'll be thunder." "And then what?" Hugh asked. "Ransom, brother, a fat one, and fear, worth more than gold." We knew he'd be traveling with a small escort, only 6 riders. Bad news for him, excellent for us. The plan: Robert on the hill above the narrow path through the grove, Hugh and Richard block the road with a felled log. Thomas and I move in from the side to close the circle. Lawrence and Walter wait behind to cut off any retreat. The day was gray, the sky heavy, pressing down on the shoulders. We waited in silence. Only the birds would startle from the branches when the sound of hooves crept up the valley. The first signal was Robert's arrow. It landed in the dirt right before the judge's horse. The horses shied, the riders slowed, and that's when Hugh stepped into the road. "Where's the rush, my lord?" His voice rang like the clang of a blade. De Sherwood tried to play the part of authority. "You dare interfere with the king's representative? That's punishable by death." "Maybe," I said, stepping out from the grove, "but first we'll find out how much the king will pay to keep you breathing." The escort charged forward. First mistake. Richard and Hugh cut down 2 before they could swing. Robert took a third out of the saddle with an arrow to the shoulder. Thomas moved like a cat, and before the judge could react, Thomas was behind him. "Off," he said flatly. "We didn't beat William. No. He had to be returned to those paying for him, whole and scared out of his wits. We blindfolded him, put him on a horse, and led him through the woods to our hideout. For 3 days he sat in a timber hut deep in the grove. We fed him, but every time he heard one of us laugh, he shivered. Good. That was the point. On the 4th day, men from Leicester arrived with sacks of gold. We traded them the judge for the ransom and for a story they'd tell every fresh official who came here to administer justice. We knew the king would rage, but with the rage would come fear. And fear, that's a currency you can't steal. You have to earn it. After the Sherwood affair, England woke up different. Every official kept a hand on his sword and eyes on the road. Every peasant retold the story, adding new details that never happened. We became legends while still breathing, and that's when the king decided it was time to end it. In May 1326, royal proclamations went up in every town and village. For the head of any Folville brother, 100 pounds in gold. 100 pounds, enough to buy a castle with land. But with gold came betrayal. Friends began looking at you as if there was a price tag nailed to your face. Even in taverns where yesterday we were greeted like heroes, the air turned heavy when we walked in. "Did you see how they looked at us?" Richard asked as we left the inn. "I saw," I said, "and that's good. Let them fear us to our faces, not just whisper behind our backs." The first real threat came at the Riversaw crossing. We were walking the narrow path when Hugh spotted something wrong. The boat, meant to be waiting for us, was gone. Then an arrow hissed out of the bushes. Robert barely had time to shove me to the ground. The fight was quick and filthy. They outnumbered us, but they didn't expect us to charge straight at them. Richard snapped a spear in the hands of the first man to get close. Lawrence's knife buried itself in the ribs of a guard aiming at me. Thomas tore a sword from an enemy and used it to cut us a path to the river. We waded across. No boat. It had been a trap. The water was cold as a knife and heavy on the legs. Behind us came shouts and curses they didn't dare follow, but the worst blow was still ahead. A week later, we learned that one of our old acquaintances, a merchant named John Mercy, had sold out our stash in the old tower to the king's men. When we got there, instead of our gold and supplies, there were only boot prints and empty barrels. "I'll find him," Hugh said quietly. and he'll regret being born. From then on, we moved fast and stopped for nothing. Forests, marshes, old roads unmarked on any map. We slept in shifts. Someone was always on watch. And though we laughed over supper, each of us knew we weren't just living like outlaws anymore. We were living like hunted animals. But there was one reason we kept going. We had a plan that might not only stop the king's hunt, but force him to acknowledge us openly. And it began in a courtroom. There are places where people feel safe: the church, their own home, and the courtroom. Fools! You're only safe where your men hold the doors and your brothers hold the swords. Our plan was simple and brazen. Walk straight into the Leicester court, where they were trying one of our allies, Sir Roger Beller, and make sure the trial ended not with a sentence, but with a victory. Baylor wasn't a saint. He played both sides, but this time the king's men wanted him gone to seize his land. If they took him, we'd lose a vital link in our network. Thomas said, "We're not hiding. We go through the front door." "And what, just like that?" Lawrence nearly choked on his laugh. "Exactly. And we leave the same way, with our verdict," Thomas replied. The day of the trial, the streets of Leicester were packed. When a nobleman was on trial, it was a show worth a fare. We came in full force, Hugh and Richard up front like two walls, Thomas and I behind them, Robert, Walter, and Lawrence bringing up the rear. The judge, an old hound named Henry de Hastings, raised an eyebrow when he saw us enter. "Folville?" His voice was a mix of surprise and distaste. "We've come to see justice," I said, "maybe even believe in it." The trial played out as usual. Witnesses, bought and paid for by the crown, swore that Beller abused peasants and refused to pay taxes. We listened in silence, knowing it was all a setup. When the judge raised his gavel to deliver the verdict, Hugh stepped forward. "Hell with this farce." His voice cracked through the hall like an axe hitting timber. In the same heartbeat, Richard ripped his sword free, Robert drew his bow, and Walter barred the doors with a bench. The crowd froze. "The verdict's this," I said, walking up to the judge's table. "Sir Roger walks free, and you, my lord, forget you saw us today. Otherwise, next time, we meet somewhere far less civilized." De Hastings swallowed hard. He could see we were ready to turn the hall into a slaughterhouse. "Case dismissed," he muttered. We walked out under stares mixed with fear and awe. And that day I understood law isn't books, robes, or seals. Law is what you can make others accept. But this stunt had consequences. We were no longer just a gang. We'd become a symbol of defiance. And symbols, they either break or they're destroyed. The king was already preparing his final move against us. The king was done with half measures. After our courtroom stunt, he gathered a real army against us. Royal knights, mercenaries, and even noble families we'd crossed in the past. They weren't riding for the law. They were riding for reward and revenge. We learned they'd marched out of Nottingham, burning every manor they thought was ours. For the first time in years, we knew the forests and roads wouldn't save us. "If we stay scattered, they'll pick us off one by one," Hugh said. "So where?" Thomas asked. "The old tower at Anstey," I answered. "Its walls are thicker than any oath." We gathered there, 7 brothers and a handful of loyal friends. The tower stood on a hill, with a clear view of every approach. We stocked arrows, water, and food for a week. They came at dawn, hundreds. The drumbeat of hooves shook the ground. From beneath their helmets, cold eyes stared up, and at the front rode a knight in black armor, the king's commander. "Folville," he called, "lay down your arms and come out. The king is merciful. Perhaps you'll keep your lives." "Tell the king," I shouted from the battlement, "a raven doesn't kneel." The first wave, infantry with shields, we met with Robert's arrows and smoke from burning rags. The second wave, battering rams. But the walls held. The day dragged on like hot iron. We fought without counting time. Lawrence laughed even when a spear split his shoulder. Hugh stood at the gate, throwing men back like branches. But at night, it happened, the thing we hadn't foreseen. Walter was gone, and with him, the key to the postern gate. An hour later, screams came from below. They'd breached through the passage that was supposed to be our escape. The fight inside turned into a slaughter. Thomas fell covering me. Richard, with a sword in each hand, drew enemies away so Hugh could carry the wounded Lawrence. When the walls finally fell, only 4 of us were left. We broke into the dark forest, and though we escaped, I knew it was the end of our pack. Without Thomas, without Richard, without the tower, we'd lost more than gold or freedom. We'd lost the legend itself. The survivors went their separate ways. Hugh lived for a few more years near the Welsh border, avoiding towns, but they say, riding in the night now and then under another name. Robert took up the sword as a mercenary in France, where wars paid better than revenge. He disappeared during a campaign in Gascony. Lawrence healed, but his arm never worked the same. He settled in a fishing village where they knew him only as the quiet man who mended nets. And me? Well, you're hearing this story. That means I chose another weapon, not the sword, but the word. Because sometimes it's not the man who strikes who keeps the legend alive. It's the one who remembers. If you've traveled this road with me through smoke, steel, and betrayal, subscribe. There are more shadows in history yet to walk. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The raven likes to know where his echoes reach.